Colin Lobo is Executive Vice President of Engineering at NRMCA, member of ACI 301, 318, 132, 329. I'll leave it to you to understand what those numbers mean. Other committees, and also active on several ASTM committees. Colin has worked closely with Ward, Bev, and Bruce on several efforts to support joint initiatives of ASCC and NRMCA. He will speak to some of those activities.
Invited to present at this session. We have tried to work and have worked successfully very closely with the American Society of Concrete Contractors, and in the background, Bev has always been supportive of partnering together to make sure that we try to speak with a single voice while we can, and try to resolve things when we cannot. And I appreciate that. Generally we have not had Bruce face-to-face with producers, because that can be a challenging task to dump him in front of a bunch of producers, but they used to send Ward instead, so unfortunately he does have a unique in a set of initials, and so when you see Bruce smiling like this, you have to wonder whether there are different interpretations of that smile. It's either he liked what you said, he probably thought you don't know what the hell you're talking about, okay? Or he just wasn't listening because he came from the bar, so in most cases I think what happens is that this is what it is. Whatever you're talking, you're full of shit. That's eventually what happens. One of my first interactions with Bruce was when he developed a relatively simple sort of document that apparently ACI 214 didn't know how to take it in and probably use it. So he sent it to Dick Gaynor, my boss at that point, and Dick said, this is probably very useful because something even concrete producers can understand. So he gave it to me and said, put it in some format, start drawing all the charts and all that stuff. And so this is one of our publications that we still hand out at our technical short course, and it was very succinct, and it has the right references. What are the ACI requirements for cores? Why do we need 3 cores? What is an erratic core when you have 3 cores? When can you throw one out? That type of stuff. Can you then use that core strength result to calculate an equivalent F prime C? We clearly say you shouldn't do that, even though everybody does it. Then he talks about, in the other part, how does strength vary in different places of the structure depending on how you take a core, high in the structure, low in the structure, horizontal, vertical, those sorts of things, all reference, and other factors that affect core. So that was one of my first interactions to make sure that we had a document that was useful and understandable to the industry. Naturally, you don't want to send Bruce to take a core on a structure that might look like Swiss cheese at some point. Then somewhere around 2002, and Bruce has normally worked in the background, we started the P2P initiative, and P2P initiative was saying try to evolve specifications more away from prescription and more towards performance, specifically for the concrete mixture. I think we made a mistake that we sent my boss, Bob Garbini, to make a presentation at an ASCC event at that point. And that set us back a few years. But one of the things that Bob sort of emphasized on was this clause that said that submittals basically should just document that the mixture met the specification requirements. And one of the things that probably was emphasized more than it should have been was company proprietary information will not be revealed. Okay. Now, that went off on a tangent like it does with most contracting meetings, and so they basically said, what, are you going to give us a blank submittal and tell us not tell us what's in the mix, or a blank delivery ticket? So that took about 2 years before we retracted some of that, and we said, this is really not an attempt to hide vital information. If you want to know about it, we will tell you about it, because there was a parallel initiative in Canada which was called intellectual property, and it was proposed as a evolution to performance. So we basically had to retract on some of that. And so, as we saw in the previous session, we got together. They sent Ward and Tommy Rotura and some of those other guys to come up with what we wanted to develop as a checklist for pre-construction, where we essentially decided on things that would be the producer's responsibility to satisfy the contractor's needs in terms of consistency and set characteristics, especially for slabs, slump, air content, especially on slabs, not to have air in it and stuff like that, and things that would be the contractor's responsibility. So this was sort of developed through a process that we went through and developed that. And I'm sure Bruce was somewhere in the background advising on some of this. ASCC and NRMCA also developed a pretty comprehensive document, which was the pre-construction checklist. This is about 20 pages, and everybody said, well, this is too long, and we will never get through this checklist if we actually try to do it. And we said this doesn't mean that you have to do everything in the checklist, but at least we give you some advice as to what you need to consider. Gives you ideas of what needs to be talked about. And so ASCC and NRMCA had some joint sessions where they went out to our promotion and regional groups to discuss how you might use these checklists. We had some heavy hitters that were involved in that: Mike Snyder, Jack Hawley, Nick Maloof, God forbid, Ross Martin. So they went to various places and, they gave these presentations, even Tommy Rotura. I think I realized at that point that a pre-construction meeting in New York City can be relatively short, because it says like, hey, we got a problem, and the response is, hey, listen to me, we done got no problem, you figure it out, capiche? And so that ends the meeting and they go to the bar. So that's a pre-construction meeting that could occur, let's say maybe just in New York City. We then have a checklist also developed for ordering and scheduling ready-mix concrete, things that need to be considered when concrete is ordered, relatively short one. We also worked with the American Concrete Pumping Association to develop some basic things for a pre-construction meeting that needed to be discussed regarding pumping concrete, sampling location, those sorts of details, and what happens when things don't match up between the point of discharge and the point of placement. Then finally, of course, the other big problem that we always have is the issue related to testing concrete. So we also extracted some of that information from the checklist and have a new checklist on concrete acceptance testing. Who's responsible for curing, power, space, those sorts of details are sort of advised as to what you need to consider, and this also has some excerpts from the ASTM and other standards as to as the background for this information. And you probably don't want to remember this link, but if you go to nrmca.org and just type in checklist, you can access all of these documents. So that was a good, successful thing that we developed, and we still continue to try and keep it updated as needed. Of course, this is the posse, ASCC posse, that has basically developed what has been discussed all through today, all the pet peeves that the contractors have to deal with in terms of, and I threw Klinger in there because he's the next, Ward Malish, if you will. But these are the types of topics that, Ward and Bruce have basically addressed in a variety of venues and different formats to make sure that the thought process is documented somewhere, that it can be referenced or used in the future. And some of these will last for many years, because we're probably going to see all of these things somewhere or somehow discussed in today's sessions. And naturally, the more popular outcomes from the ASCC's point of view are, of course, the position statements. If you include the decorative ones, there are more than 50 topics that they have developed, very brief, succinct, and useful to establish a contractor's perspective on these various important topics on constructability. We naturally had one issue that we sort of agreed to disagree on. This was the position statement on measuring air content in non-air entrained concrete. And this position statement was relatively simple. It says when there is a maximum air content specified for trowel floors, measure the air content. You need to verify that the air content wasn't high, and there's no tolerance on that air content. It's a maximum value. And so we took this opportunity to complain that, you're only pointing out one factor that can cause delaminations. So a member of ours, Eric Meisenheimer with Chandler Concrete, and we wrote a letter to the editor in CI to, sort of give our perspective on this. And we said, there are many other factors that can result in the potential for delaminations, and it's a combination of how fast that concrete bleeds and how fast it sets up and how that contractor times the finishing operations that cause it, and air is only one factor that can impact that. So that was our perspective on that. Of course, they brought out everybody in this committee to come and respond back to us. And, wow, we've got all these people, high-level people, that are challenging what we wrote, and they go into referencing Rylam and everybody else that says air is the main factor that affects the delamination of slabs. And I don't think most of these people know what Rylam is, so I'm sure Bruce wrote all this stuff. So and the main conclusion there was, this is in Concrete International, September 2019. And the main conclusion is, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. We appreciate whatever you said, but there's no data to prove whatever you said, so give us the right concrete with the less air. That was the summary of that. Anyway, we agreed to disagree on that. They also take up, if you look at the very popular now concrete Q&A sections in CI, I think this is another place where they take an opportunity to opine. Bruce is probably the author of probably most of the 25% of the more recent Q&As that you see in Concrete International, so I always go to that page. After, of course, I read the president's memo. Yeah, I say that, but I probably go to the last page and always read that. And you'll always see that somewhere there you might have an opinion from Bruce and someone else on an interpretation. And these are well written, they're very succinct, they're responding to a specific problem on a thing, and they're also well referenced to have backup information as to where this information came from. The one in the current CI is very succinct, right? Is the GC's interpretation correct? Well, in one word, no. Okay, so that's pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of words around that, but you don't need to read more on that. So, we got involved in another one on a Q&A, and he sort of, Bruce and, Jim pulled me in on this and said maybe we should speak with a single voice, but this was on can testing labs have true companions? So you have, this issue about testing, and some people don't know, but Bruce used to run a testing lab in one part of his life, and he understands some of the issues and challenges with regard to reliable testing. So here you have a bunch of data where you have an owner's testing lab, a producer's testing lab, and what was the difference? And the question was, is there is the testing lab actually doing a good job when you consider the companion test done by the producer? And so we looked at the data, and naturally I'm not going to go through the data, but basically the concept was, are these differences between the two different labs statistically significant? So we looked at the, generally when you look at these are slump, air, and strength. So you have in the standard some precision statement that gives you an acceptable difference. And so we did some sort of analysis and saying, based on these, we would like to dump on the test lab to say that they screwed up, but actually we looked at this data reliably and said, based on these test results, the differences between the testing agencies are within the precision stated for these test methods, so therefore we cannot claim that these two different sets of data are actually statistically significantly different. Though we say that there is a probable bias where the producer's testing results are generally more conformant with the specification. So we have used this in many places to document, something where we can explain something that is happening in reality in the field. They also thought that this was an important topic and translated it in Spanish. So if you don't understand what we said here, take the Spanish version and read it. Bruce has also tried to pull me into other types of thing. This one was a issue related to 318. Are slabs on vapor retarders isolated from the exposure conditions defined in the code? And the issue here is that if you have sulfates in the soil that get into the S3 category, then the code requires you to use a water cement ratio of 0.4, which is not very conducive to constructability of that slab. So the point is that if you isolated the slab from the ground using a 10 mil vapor retarder, do you really have to comply with the code? Because of the the thing. So this was a in-house sort of research, I'm guessing, that Bruce and gang did to try to respond to this question, where they they actually did a compacted subgrade in a container, tried with and without a vapor retarder. They actually covered it and tried to get the evaporative process, and showed that once you put that vapor retarder, there's a probably high possibility that the sulfate attack that you might see. Now, this is not a standard method. This is sort of a made-up method, but they came up with a difference that was then published in August 2021. And they sent it to me, and they asked me to review it, and then they said, okay, why don't we just add your name to it so that we're speaking with one voice? So that's another interesting thing. Now, the other question is, if you have isolated the slab in an interior slab, can you then avoid, the exposure class associated with triggering alkali aggregate reaction problems? Could be a stretch, but maybe we can consider that. This was another one, and this is something that Eamon's going to talk about in this session. If you get a low strength result, do we have to shut down the project? Is the sky falling? Once you get a individual strength test, and we have very specific strength acceptance criteria in ACI, that's basically statistically based and then tagged to F prime C, and we know what those are, and we need to understand and use them properly so that we don't have a cause to over-design our mixtures more than we need to. So do we over-design too much? We sort of discussed the ACI statistical. F prime C is not a minimum for an individual strength test, and then sort of document that if we don't over-design by so much to avoid that, the owner does benefit from a possible reduced cost. And in this table, we sort of document that depending on the total volume of concrete placed, expect to have at least this number of tests that can be less than F prime C. Not F prime C minus 500, but somewhere less than F prime C. Eamon's going to talk a lot more about this as we completed this paper. You had that directive from Bruce. Hey, Eamon, send a picture of someone who looks really nice and lie on your bio. That's the respect that ASCC members get from, Bruce. So this also was important and also translated into Spanish, and Eamon's going to speak to this in Spanish, I'm guessing, in this session. We also think that the other problem that we've seen is that while we work hard at ACI to develop specifications and codes and stuff like that, eventually AIA goes and writes master spec, and we have this issue that master spec as developed is in many cases not very consistent with ACI standards. And so back in around 2015, we were trying to challenge, and find out who writes section 33,000 on master spec, and we developed a contact at that point with Evitru, who was the contract person or agency or group that wrote master spec for AIA. And we said if the starting spec is flawed, naturally all the design offices that license those specs and make modifications are going to be flawed, and we see all these problems in the specification. So we contacted Bruce. We established the contact who was responsible for that cast in place section, and we developed a bunch of comments, and our basis for the comments was basically this is what ACI says or this is what ASTM says, and you're in conflict with that. And so they took about 50% of our comments. This is probably the first time that master spec had accepted the durability exposure classes in that document in 2018, even though that those were in the code in ACI 318 in 2008. But we were sort of partially successful, both Bruce and NRMCA wrote a lot of comments, and they accepted about 50%. We're going through that process again with the current version of master spec. As you can see, a lot of the BS comments over here combined with our comments, and suggested that we make all these revisions to master spec. This is now under a new firm called Deltec, and so we are working and sort of in progress, and any day now we will get an idea of how many of these comments that they have accepted. NRMCA and ASC has had a very good partnership. This is mainly through our promotion activities. NRMCA has been provided a seat on ASCC's board of directors, currently by Brian Killingsworth, previously John Hanson. Established a joint paving committee. NRMCA does provide and work with contractors to provide design assistance for parking lots and other activities, including a life cycle cost analysis to support flipping parking lots from asphalt to concrete. Also, ASCC is aware and supports the NRMCA Pave Ahead and Build with Strength campaigns. We do partner with the NRMCA, with the contractors on various webinars and sessions, education on construction with ICF things, and also with individual contractors and producers to promote together what we call a parking lot boot camp. And the boot camp covers a 10-hour training on various things related to the best practices on moving ahead with overlays as well as parking lot construction in the attempt to flip from asphalt to concrete or put concrete overlays on existing asphalt pavements. So this is a good attempt to make sure that not only the ready-mix concrete industry is involved in the promotion, but as a team, we go together and promote concrete together, okay? I'll end my presentations with what I want to call BS-isms, okay? And these are sort of extracted from responses or emails I get from Bruce periodically, okay? Did you ever work on something and feel like you never really made a difference? Well, Bruce, I claim that I think you have made a lot of difference, as many people have said, but sometimes everybody does have this feeling, I think. This was in response, and they say, hey, Bruce, could you be a consultant for something? And he says, as a consultant, I don't charge much to stand around and stroke my beard while attempting to look intelligent. I just guarantee the intelligent part, okay? Then, of course, that same pet peeve, do you ever see something as messed up as this? The engineer specifically states in the general notes that no water can be added at the job site if the concrete in the truck contains a high-range water reducer. This is a remnant from master spec, of course. Not sure I'll be able to convince the engineer, damn. And we had this in 301 at some point, and we said, why the hell did we have it? So we got rid of it, but it's still in master spec. This was an attempt by ACI to reference ACI 117 in the building code. This is naturally a thing, and so now the interpretation means that the building code official has to interpret tolerances. So its response is, we anticipate amusement in the bug-eyed looks of building officials attempting to grasp floor tolerances. However, we at ASCC do not take pleasure in this type of amusement. Okay, that's his. Then he wants me to be part of a thing that he wrote, of course, and he says, we want to add your name at the bottom of the usual no paying, no fame acknowledgement that ACI passes out. So then another one, he asked me for his comment, get this right, as like you always do, it's too late in your career to screw up, you have too many mouths to feed. Shows that he really cares. This is something that's driving him out, making him retire. ASCC is developing a sustainability committee. Wonderful. I don't want to deal with this anymore, you know. Then the last one, if you search CI for Malish, Lobo, and Supernant, Ward has 10. You'll find 10 sort of Ward. I mean, Ward has written so much in so many other places. I was surprised it was only 10. Lobo has 27, and Supernant has 49. Ward won't catch up with you. I have you beat, but I'm out of here soon. Well, maybe you can catch up. I don't intend to catch up, Bruce. And there's no way I want to compete with you anyway. So anyway, thanks for all you do. Happy trails, and hopefully we'll have a drink at some point. Yeah.